crazed mob of Muslim fanatics who targeted the tiny Christian minority in Jaranwala. What happened in Jaranwala was that there was this allegation against two Christians that they had committed blasphemy, sacrilege by apparently burning some pages of the Quran, and then a mob was whipped up and they went on a rampage. Over a dozen churches were vandalized, were burned down, looted. This mob went and looted the houses of the Christian community. The police, far from stopping this mob, was in a sense a silent bystander watching this pogrom unfold. This insincere assurances being given to the minority community, crocodile tears being shed not just by the clerics but also by people in authority. Hindus are of course a pet target for the Muslim majority community. None of the main players, none of the main guys who are responsible for injecting this violence in the society have been targeted. There was recently a very serious anti-Christian pogrom in a small town in Faislabad district called Jaranwala in Pakistan. There was a crazed mob of Muslim fanatics who targeted the tiny Christian minority in Jaranwala. It's a small town where there is a large number of Christians who live out there. Most of them live on the margins of society, and yet even that is unacceptable for the majority Muslim community in the region. During this violence, which ostensibly happened on allegations of blasphemy, and we'll come to that in a bit, on how that blasphemy law has been weaponized by the radical Muslims in Pakistan, with state sanction, with the sanction of the larger majority community, or at least a tacit acceptance of this particular law. But what happened in Jaranwala was that there was this allegation against two Christians that they had committed blasphemy, sacrilege by apparently burning some pages of the Quran, and then a mob was whipped up and they went on a rampage. It was, as I say, a pogrom. Over a dozen churches, and this was not just limited to that locality where this allegation was made, but the violence spread across the place, and over a dozen churches were vandalized, were burned down, looted. There was blasphemy committed because the Bible was burned. All kinds of things happened. But that was not all. This mob went and looted the houses of the Christian community, and these are, like I said, there were people who were living on the margins of society. These were people who, with great effort, had managed to collect something for themselves, and everything was razed to dust in a matter of minutes. The police, far from stopping this mob, was in a sense a silent bystander watching this pogrom unfold. Thousands of people were displaced from that region. They had to go and spend night in the fields in the region because they were terrified of what the mob might do. There was no protection being given to the people in this region. Because this is the age of social media, this news burst out immediately, and it went viral, and throughout Pakistan, throughout the world, in fact, the images of this violence started playing out on screens, on television, on social media, on a range of other things. The standard reaction in the Pakistani authorities was, the standard empty condemnation of this incident, this insincere assurances being given to the minority community, again insincere declarations that the Pakistani state will not stand for this kind of violence. There was the usual kind of crocodile tears being shed, not just by the clerics but also by people in authority, in the Punjab government, in the federal government. The Prime Minister of Pakistan, who's a puppet of the Pakistan army, started tweeting. Now tweeting is supposedly a kind of an assurance which is given and a substitute for actually doing something about the anti-minority violence in Pakistan, but he tweeted that I am gutted and stuff like that. But the guy went back to Jaranwala. He took a whole lot of people with him. The Punjab government held a cabinet meeting out there as though that was supposed to reassure and assuage the people. And then they announced, the usual compensation for the victims of this violence. There was the usual condemnation in the Pakistani media, some of them hemmed and hawed, ifs and buts, but even the condemnation by people who were probably sincere in their condemnation never really pointed out. They condemned the act, but they never really condemned the people who carried out the act, or the masterminds or the perpetrators or the brains behind this kind of violence. According to some reports, the Tehreek-e-Labbaik Pakistan, a Barelvi radical group, which has actually weaponized the blasphemy law and has been using it against the people in Pakistan, against the minorities in particular, but also against the majority community. Now, this violence should have ideally stopped when this outrage or this pretension to outrage emerged, but it didn't. And even after what happened in Jaranwala, there were reports of how Christian and of course the Hindus are of course a pet target for the Muslim majority community. The Ahmadis are of course the new Jews in Pakistan. They are meted out a treatment which is what the Nazis used to mete out to the Jews in Nazi Germany. But the Christians faced the brunt of the violence. There were a spate of other incidents, smaller incidents, which probably did not get the same attention as the pogrom in Jaranwala. But for people who were victims of that violence, it was as horrific as what happened in Jaranwala. And what was happening was typical intimidation. They went and they plastered the walls of churches with Islamist slogans. And this is a kind of a catch-22 for the Christian community. If they erase that graffiti which is put, they can be accused of blasphemy. And if they don't, they kind of surrender to the Muslim majoritarianism which is rampant in Pakistan. And the same thing, churches, the gates were locked, all kinds of things were happening. And along with it, there were testimonies of local Christians that the mob was intimidating them, indulging in what can be called forced conversion. They were forcing the local Christian community to recite the kalma, which means basically accept Islam, denounce Christianity. And if they did that, their houses would not be burned down. A lot of this happened after the violence in Jaranwala. A lot of this happened after all those assurances which these Pakistani politicians and civil servants and the military guys gave to the people and declared it publicly. Despite all that, this violence took place. There was this eyewash of an action of arrest of about 100 odd people, but none of the main players, none of the main guys who are responsible for injecting this violence in the society have been targeted. The blasphemy law is a bad law, there's no doubt about it. But what is even worse is that how it has been implemented in Pakistan. You know, there are laws which are good and there are laws which are bad, but it is how that law actually operates, how that law is weaponized against a particular target community or against particular individuals, that makes it really a terrible law. And in Pakistan, the blasphemy law has been weaponized primarily against the minority community, but even against people from the Muslim community. In fact, there is a professor, a young professor in Pakistan who has been in jail for the last 10 years on charges of blasphemy. There is no judge who is brave enough to say that this is miscarriage of justice, no judge brave enough to declare him innocent, no government gives a damn about the guy, and he is languishing in prison for over a decade now. So it's the way the law operates, number one, and this law operates like a one-way street. Ideally, the blasphemy law should be the same for every community, but there are Pakistanis who come on public television, speak in extremely disparaging, contemptuous way about other faiths, the Hindus in particular, but also against Christians, against Ahmadis. Of course, it's open season, and yet there is never the blasphemy law is never imposed against them. They seem to have a free run as far as the blasphemy law is concerned, because ideally the blasphemy law should also apply on people who do this kind of hate mongering against the minority communities, but that's not the way the law works in Pakistan. It's a one-way street. But what is even more egregious, if I might use that term, is how the law has been weaponized by radical groups, the Tehreek-e-Labbaik in particular in Pakistan, and they have used it to drum up support. They have used it to gather street power. They have used it to become politically relevant. You know, the rest of the world, for example, the Western media, the so-called liberal Western media, and governments in the West, in Europe in particular, the effect European Union, which keeps talking about certain conventions that Pakistan will have to adhere to before it can be eligible for getting things like the GSP plus concessions which are given to Pakistan, which get Pakistan billions of dollars in trade concessions. The European Union, despite continuously talking about it, insisting on these conventions, human rights convention, minority rights convention, labor rights conventions, seem to be giving a free pass to the Pakistanis so that they can very blithely violate these conventions and never adhere to them. You never see the kind of outrage from rags like The Guardian or the New York Times. There is never any agitation over this issue. It's almost as though these people have given some kind of an Islamic exceptionalism to Pakistan to keep bludgeoning the minority communities in Pakistan. This is despite the fact that the conditions in which minorities in Pakistan live are horrific. The Hindu community, for example, they can't even cremate their dead. There are in many places not even cremation grounds. Hindus are forced to bury their dead in many places. In many places, their cremation grounds have been taken over by the Muslim community. And they are not even allowed access to the cremation grounds. If they go and bury their dead, and it happens to be a Muslim graveyard, then there have been reports of bodies being exhumed and violated by people because they refuse to even accept the burial of a Hindu or a Christian in their burial grounds. But that's not all. What they do to the dead is another matter, but it is what they do to the living which should really be bothering a lot of us. So for example, in Pakistan, there are reports of over 1,000 young girls, mostly from the Hindu community, mostly in the province of Sindh, where the Hindus are around 10% of the population, where these young girls, sometimes 10, 11, 12 years old, forcibly kidnapped by local Muslims, forcibly converted, forcibly married off, and there is absolutely no justice. When cases go to the courts either sit on them or actually side with the perpetrators of this violence. And this is not just the trial courts, but this goes right up to the Supreme Court of Pakistan, where the victims are thrown to the wolves and given back to their kidnappers, to their tormentors. And there are innumerable scenes of parents wailing inconsolably, and yet there is almost this wall of silence which takes over as far as the Pakistani so-called civil society is concerned. Kidnapping, extortion is par for the course as far as the minority community is concerned. In the case of Hindus, the temples are vandalized, they are sometimes forcibly occupied. The same thing has happened with some Sikh gurdwaras as well. It's almost as though the minorities are treated the way the Nazis used to treat the Jews, as Untermensch or lesser beings. The one community for which the maximum hatred is reserved is the Ahmadiyya community. Now, the irony is that the Ahmadiyya community was in the forefront of supporting the demand for Pakistan. And so were the Christians actually in Punjab. The Christian community in Punjab actually backed the Muslim League and voted in favor of the Muslim League's demand for Pakistan. So it's an irony of history of how people have taken decisions which their future generations have paid for in terrible terrible wages have been visited on the future generations for decisions which were taken by their elders decades ago, and that torment is not ending. Now very clearly, as far as the Ahmadi community is concerned, their places of worship are demolished, they are forcibly occupied. Ahmadis just practicing their faith are liable to be treated as blasphemers, violating the law, because the laws are such that even if the Ahmadis practice their faith, they fall foul of the law. And then of course, very glibly, many of the Pakistanis will say, well, they were violating the law and it's just the law which is taking its course, little realizing that that law is terrible and it's discriminatory. But that is what Pakistan is. In the case of the Christian community, a majority of the Christians are people who converted to Christianity and belong to the lower caste, to the depressed classes. And in Pakistan, very often and very publicly, casteist slurs are used against the Christian community. If those slurs were to be used, even those caste names to be mentioned in India, somebody like me would go to jail under the SC/ST Act. Those are the protections which are offered in India to people from the scheduled castes. And yet in Pakistan, which claims to be Islamic, which claims to be a country which talks about the brotherhood of mankind and what have you, this is the kind of treatment which is meted out to the minorities. there is that pro forma kind of tat-tatting by the international community, but there has been a complete blind eye which has been turned to the condition and the persecution. In fact, I would go to the extent of saying the slow genocide, a genocide in slow motion of the minority communities. We've seen the Hindus, of course, escape to India in droves. And this is one thing which I hold against the government in India, the current government, which passed a very good law called the Citizenship Amendment Act, which provided some relief to persecuted religious minorities in Pakistan, and yet nearly 4 years later they have still not notified the law. In any case, that law left a lot to be desired because it had a time limit, and the persecution of the minorities in places like Pakistan, including Bangladesh, I would say, has no time limit. It is ongoing, it is unending, and yet nobody has raised a little finger to help these communities. Now, so of course the Hindus and many of these other communities can find, or at least might harbor some hope of finding some refuge in a country like India. But what about Muslim minorities? For example, the Shias, who have been also participating in some of these pogroms against Ahmadis, for example. They also consider the Ahmadis to be outside the pale of Islam. And now the shoe is on the other foot, because the majority Sunni community has recently passed a criminal amendment law which would actually mete out the same treatment to the Shias in Pakistan, which is meted out to Ahmadis. It's not as egregious as the discrimination against Ahmadis, but if the Shias were to practice their own faith, were to adhere to their own beliefs, which include questioning the line of succession from the Prophet, the Shias would be held liable under the blasphemy laws. And of course, the Shias are up in arms. Unlike the Ahmadis, who have a very tiny community, the Shias constitute almost 20, maybe even bigger percentage of Pakistan's population. So they are not taking this lying down. And for now, that law has been put on hold because the President of Pakistan has not given his assent to the law, and since there is no parliament anymore, that law, that particular bill does not become a law right now. But I think it's simply a matter of time before that push to force this law through comes. So clearly, I think if there is an endangered species in Pakistan, it is the species of mankind, or at least that part of mankind which does not adhere to the Taliban type majoritarian Islam which prevails in Pakistan. And this is a time for the rest of the world to wake up, take notice of what is happening to the minority communities. But of course, they can very easily turn a blind eye to it, pretend that nothing of the sort is happening, and the persecution will continue. And that is the direction in which things seem to be headed as far as Pakistan is concerned. But who cares?